This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
Dustin Parker,
Ulisa Luciano Ruiz,
Yampi Mendez Arocho,
Monica Diamond,
Lexi,
Johanna Metzger,
Serena Angelique Velasquez Ramos,
Laila Pelaz Sanchez,
Penelope Diaz Ramirez,
Nina Pop,
Helly J. O'Regan,
Tony McDade,
Dominique Remy Fells,
Ria Milton,
Jane Thompson,
Selena Reyes Hernandez,
Brian Egypt Powers,
Brayla Stone,
Mercy Mack,
Shaki Peters,
Bree Black,
Summer Taylor,
Marilyn Cazares,
Dior H. Ova,
Quisha D.
Aja
Hardy,
Raquel Roan Spears,
Key Sam,
Marian Burnett,
Mia Green,
Michelle Michelin Ramos Farkas,
Felicia Harris,
Brooklyn Deshuna,
Sarah Blackwood.
Angel Haynes.
You just heard the names of every known transgender and gender non-conforming individual violently killed in the United States so far this year. This community suffers one of the highest rates of violent deaths in the nation, with 2020 on track to be the worst year on record. I'm Talitha DeMessa.
I'm Jen Hardy.
And we're with Look West.
Facing violence and other manifestations of anger from outside their community, it can be hard to imagine where transgender and gender-expansive individuals find their fortitude and resilience. Talitha interviewed Ebony Ava Harper, a human rights activist who is transgender, to learn about everything from discrimination to resources to the personal advice she would give to others.
My name is Ebony Ava Harper. The word activist is used a lot these days. You even have a celebritist. I will say activist because I've been activating since I came out the womb. And I think trans people are born activists. So I will use that label. I'm an activist. I am a nurturer. I'm a little bit of crazy. I'm a little bit of cool. And I work every day to advocate for trans people throughout the state of California and beyond. And recently, I was able to co-sponsor a bill with the organization I lead, California Transcend, AB 2218, and it's to get, better health care to trans people throughout the state. And so my current function, I was in philanthropy for a while, and I had a heart to do more straight on advocacy. And so I am a public health advocate, transgender public health advocate, and I'm a system changer. I am a wealth redistributor, and I'm for the people on the bottom.
What are your pronouns? Why is it personally important to you and for others to use pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her, hers. Pronouns are important because that's how the person want to be referenced. And it is kind of disrespectful to reference someone in ways that they don't want to be referenced. There's many pronouns. It's not just the traditional senses we think of he and she and things like that. There's her and there's other pronouns. And it's all about respect and just giving people the respect that they want, even whether you agree with it or not, even whether you don't know enough about it. You just respect that person's existence and that person's how they want to be referred to. If you misgender someone and when they want to be called a she and they're called a he, that can lead the person to having depression and a downward spiral. If they want to be referenced as they or them, and you're he-ing or she-ing them, that could lead that person into downward spiral and depression, and it could be extremely hurtful.
How would you define being transgender to someone who doesn't fully understand the term?
That's a hard question because in some ways we are undefinable, and trans is a relatively new term to define our existence. We have gone by Two-Spirit, we've gone by Fa'afafini in in the Polynesian Islands. We gone by many names, eunuchs, so trans is someone that usually identifies, it's a broad umbrella and it covers gender diverse people, I would say. And so it's a huge umbrella that covers a multitude of gender identities. You identify in a different gender as an assigned as birth. I'm sorry, not born as assigned at birth.
So another one is, what are your experiences with receiving medical care or like filling out and editing government paperwork, and the struggle with identification? And also, how does like a lack of wealth, classism, and social status have that impact?
Very good question. We live in California, and California has been leading the way in other states as far as like making sure that trans people, especially in the healthcare field, is addressed how they want to be addressed. But it's still a ton of work to be done throughout the state. There's still a lot of people that really don't have a good grasp on what trans is, and even just the simple thing of just referring to them how they want to be referred in on paperwork. Even healthcare providers, believe it or not, some of them are the most ignorant. I've been asked some ignorant questions within like even a therapist session. So there's a ton of reforming going on within the healthcare system to address trans people, how they identify as. And Sutter actually is one of the ones leading the charge. I have a good friend working at Sutter, and they are actually responsible for managing their new system, because now, men have urethras, and women have, penises. I don't know if I could say that on this podcast, but so now they're redoing their whole thing, and they're also doing their gender identity structure in a way to identify gender non-conforming folks too. So things are changing, maybe not at the pace that we wanted to, and especially with the stoking of fear from this administration. We've been walked back in some respects, and in some respects we are advancing. I came out in the 90s where there was no medical care unless you were a white trans person that came from wealth. You weren't, able to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for hormones and gender reassignment surgeries or affirmation surgeries. So we would participate in underground surgeries, like, go over to TJ and they have silicone where they pump it in your hips, or silicone where they pump it in your cheeks. And that's how we would get our care. Those were really the dark ages, because a lot of trans people were like getting sex changes, and it would be like a really botched job. And it's still happening, actually. There's still a lot of trans people who don't have access to care, who still get their hormones that way, who still go over to TJ to get surgeries because their coverage isn't covering what they need at the moment. And what a statistic that I just read was, 40% of trans people have had suicide ideation at one time. When they don't get gender affirming surgery, it jumps up to 60%. Now that is wild, and it should make everyone angry, and it should make everyone want trans people to get the care that they need. And so, yeah, it shouldn't be about wealth, but it is. And now that I'm in a position where I have a job that covers my health care and all these things, and my health, my trans health has improved. I have access to a therapist. I have access to hormones. I have access to other medications. There are trans folks that don't have access, even in the state of California, to these things. Or it's very minimal. It's not quality care. And one of the things I'm fighting for throughout the state is for all trans people to have quality care. That shouldn't be like some revolutionary thing. That is just like common sense, and it should be a basic human to human thing.
I think it is a basic human necessity. So I think
Yeah.
people should have the access for that. How did you become an activist for trans rights?
Okay, now we talking. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and I grew up in the hood, in Watts. So 113th and Wilmington. At one point, we moved around a lot all over South Central, but, I lived in Watts. I went to Markham Junior High, and I was a feminine child, and I dressed in my mom's clothing, and so I was teased. My parents, I'm first generation American. My parents are from Jamaica. And so I had all these, I looked like someone that, African American, that was a descendant of Africans in America, but I was a descendant of Africans from Jamaica, which comes with a whole different culture. So when I got to school, it was a different culture. And also I felt different within. I went to high school, junior high, feeling out of place, out of body, and just in every capacity you can think of. I would say I was a born activist. I had to advocate for myself from birth. I had to fight from birth. I didn't really have the traditional, like growing up with a mom and dad in the house, and having a single mom that was attentive. My mom was all over the place, almost stereotypical hustler that you see in the hood. She was a hustler and hustling and not really focused on her kids. And so we were left to our own vices and kind of had to raise ourselves. And so I was born fighting. And I think my Jamaican element, you hear it in our music, you hear it in our culture. We're always talking about love and this and love and that. And so I think that my compassion for other folks as well, and having experienced rejection and having experienced a lot of bad stuff throughout my childhood, made me have an overwhelming compassion for other folks' journey as well. And so not only was I fighting for myself, I was fighting for others, sometimes even more than myself, as a child. As I grew, it has evolved. As I have grown internally, my activism has evolved. At first, it was mostly about anger, and it's still about anger. I mean, how can you not look at all the woes in this world and the hot messness of this world and not be angry about it? But also there's an internal process of activism that I'm starting to involve into, and I'm not talking about like in a hippy dippy way, but sometimes I am hippy dippy, and that's okay. I'm talking about kind of countering this divisiveness that we're starting to see, not only from the president, but it's a culture right now. And I'm resisting that even by trying to bring people together. And that's another form of activism is, we shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be fighting that person over there with a comb over and the orange tan.
All right. Well, what types of discrimination do you see in your work and also personally?
Well, in activism, I got arrested. It was well advertised 2 years ago for at a Stephon Clark march, and I was put in a men's jail, and it was news. It got caught up in the national news cycle, and so it was news. And I go hard for Black men. I go hard for cis Black men. I go hard for cis Black women. But what is hard is being a Black trans person and sitting between those intersections and seeing how Black folks' love for me is conditional. And sometimes there's no love at all. And sometimes I am dehumanized with the same people that I'm marching for and the same people that I am advocating for. Sometimes I can't even, sit next to them, or I'm teased or made fun of or rejected by the same people I fight for. So it's not my 9-to-5 work, but in my activist work, there is this contradiction that I notice in activism, that they're out there marching for George Floyd, but what about Tony McDade, the Black trans man that was murdered? What about all these killings of Black trans women all over the nation? You don't really hear a lot of cis Black people, I'm sorry, uplifting our voices.
So how do you think trans representation in pop culture affects discrimination against trans folks?
Okay, so when I was coming up, we had Tootsie, and with Dustin Hoffman, Miss Doubtfire, Bosom Buddies, and kind of just caricature of men dressing as women, and that being tied to being a trans person. And it was always like he's dressing up because he's in love with this woman, and it's trying to get his wife back, or he's trying get close to a woman that he desires, or To Wong Fu, where they're like over the top drag queens, and that being tied to being trans. Fast forward to like 20 some plus years later to now, where we have Pose, we have Janet Mock, we have Laverne Cox, we have so many. We have a diversity of trans representation in media right now. Not where it should be. We have Ashley Preston too, a political she analyzes politics. Now, we are being more socially accepted now, because I believe that our stories are being told authentically. Orange is the New Black, to me, in my own mindset, was a catalyst to a trans person playing a trans person. It wasn't some cis white woman playing a trans character, which we have seen quite a bit in the past. It was a Black trans woman playing a Black trans woman. Now the role, is questionable. She was in jail because she did something wrong and all those things, and we could even dice that up. But it definitely was a catalyst to something, and an actual Black trans woman on our TV screens, playing a diverse role with so many sensitive topics. And so I believe now we still have a lot to work on in the media, because I like to see like a trans person on ESPN, talking about football, and I like to see trans bodies referred to as being just as sexy as cis bodies. And while we are getting a lot of exposure right now, we're still seen as a taboo by a lot of folks. And so media, positive media, telling our real stories. Pose has did a great service to trans folks, because they're actually telling the unadulterated truth about our experience. And it's not a caricature, it's not something souped up for TV. It's actually our stories. Some of us say they're telling too much. They're revealing too much of our story, you know? So sometimes we're like, stop, you can't tell it all. Don't tell it all. But, but yeah, those stories, I think, have brought society over to, you know, welcome us a little bit more. And that's why you're seeing trans folks starting to hold jobs in diverse ways, you know. At one time, we were only known as street workers. And when you thought of the word trans or heard of the word trans, it was synonymous with, you know, someone who was doing some sex work on the street.
As a Black trans woman yourself, what additional or different hardships do you experience?
I don't know about hardship. I've experienced some hardship, yes, but I've also experienced some tremendous resilience. And there should be a course taught on Black trans resilience. Some of us have been through the most scary, hardcore, horrible situations that you could ever think of, and we have risen. I like to use the analogy that, you know, we're swimming in the water and the shark bites us and tries to tug us under. And everybody tells that story, but nobody tells the story of how we beat the hell out of the shark, you know, and rise to a better day.
What are ways you've coped and helped others in the community?
I don't know if you know about ballroom culture, but New York ballroom culture, voguing, you know, we put together a ball that was one part like Black queer culture. We invited our indigenous two-spirited friends, and they had a powwow with two-spirited folk. And then we had a poetry slam with, you know, our API family. And so, and we invited a whole bunch of cis straight folks. And so the ball had everything. It had cis straight folk, it had husband and wives coming and actually walking the ball, you know, and it was a wonderful event. And it was bringing together people from all backgrounds, people from all sides, all gender identities, you know, together. And it was a room full of love, really. And that I can name probably 20 more events that I've done like that. That's probably the key of events that I like to put together events. And I also travel. Most recently Brazil, talking to trans people over there and trying to get them assistance over there. My heart is just to fight for the trans folks at the bottom who don't really have an advocate right now. And that's a lot of us. We see Pose and we see all this exposure of trans folks, but in some regards, the needle still hasn't changed or still hasn't moved towards the progress that we need. I fight every day to move the needle just a bit more towards progress. And so my whole life is to be of service of others. And not only trans folks, to anyone down and out, you know, to anyone that is experiencing oppression. I know how it feels to be at the rock bottom. I know how it feels to be rejected. I know how it feels to, you know, have no one to rely on. And I know it's impossible for me to be all those things to everyone. But if I can just, you know, affect a few folk. And I am pretty proud of myself because I can say I probably have affected just a few in the very short time that I've been on this planet. And I am grateful to the universe for using this body as an instrument of love And sometimes, to be honest, some hecticness and craziness sometimes. I definitely give people a laugh sometimes. And, I'm also working on myself. And that is a part of, my helping too. It's helping myself as well. I'm helping myself to grow.
Knowing that Ebony, who has advocated for the passage of transgender equality bills with the state legislature, values California as protective of her rights and the rights of those she works with, Jen decided to interview Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Kahan about Transgender Awareness Week and advocacy for transgender rights. Bauer-Kahan's strong support of the LGBTQ caucus legislation has earned her respect as a strong LGBTQ plus ally.
What led you to become an LGBTQ plus ally?
So that's a great question. I was raised in the Bay Area, and so, just raised around a very accepting community. But I think that what made me become sort of a strong ally who has spent my career fighting for LGBTQ plus rights was when my sister came out to me. My sister came out to me when she was in college. She's 5 years older than me, so I was still at home. And it wasn't that she was gay that shook me. It was that she had kept it from me for what I think was years. She had a girlfriend who she was very enamored with at the time, and it had been a secret for me. And that, for my sister, who I've always been incredibly close with, was devastating. And it really made me internalize the shame and that she must have felt about her own path that was so real and upsetting, and experiencing that with her. And I remember her telling me, and the first question I asked was, how long have you known? And she answered the question about when she came out to other people, which was years before. And I said, what took you so long? And that was the only thing I wanted to know, and why she didn't tell me sooner. And as a result of that, I just started opening my eyes to what, LGBTQ plus people were experiencing in the community around me. And this was in the probably late 80s, early 90s. So things have changed a lot since then for the better. But it just became part of the fight that I have been a part of. And when I was a lawyer, I worked on the Prop 8 cases, and I remember her calling me and her saying, "This isn't about me, Rebecca. This is about the fight for equity." And at that point, that's what it had become. I mean, obviously, I wanted equal rights for her as well, but it allowed me to see in a greater way what the LGBTQ plus community was experiencing in America, and that we needed to be at the front of that fight to get equality.
It's such a great perspective to have, both the personal and the professional experience in that. And so having that, what do you think the role of an ally should be in supporting LGBT plus folks, individuals, groups, and given the topic of this episode, especially transgender rights?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's about listening and about trying to understand, what people in the LGBTQ plus community are experiencing. And it isn't a lived experience I have as an ally, right? And so the more that I can understand that experience, the better. And then it's to take action, but not necessarily at the front of that, right? I mean, I am here to support in every possible way, but it's not my story and it's not my experience. And that's a really important thing for me to hold on to as an ally. And so when it is helpful, I am there 110%, but I also will take a backseat when that's the right role to take as well. So I think it's about sort of seeing what's appropriate in the moment, whatever the fight may be, and then stepping up in a way that is helpful. And I think at times, sometimes an ally is really important. Sometimes, in our own lived experience, we know it's harder to speak up for ourselves in certain moments, right? And when that's what's happening, sometimes it helps for an ally to step out. But it's also allowing the space for those who are experiencing it to speak first, if they're ready.
And how do you think transgender rights work compares to that of other types of human rights? And I ask you this partly because I know that, you just said that you worked on some of the Prop 8 issues, but I know you've also worked on a lot of other human rights work as a lawyer, as an attorney.
Yeah, I have. And I think human rights are human rights, right? We're all human. No matter the color of your skin, who you love, whether you're trans plus, right? We're all human, and we all deserve the same human rights, the same equality. And that is the fight, right? And so to your point, you know, I've worked on the criminal justice system and the fight there for people of color. And, you know, I've worked in the LGBTQ plus space on equal rights there. And to me, it's all human rights. And so, you know, I think that is the piece that actually I think is so important. I'm glad you asked because, you know, the trans plus community needs to be brought to the forefront, I think, of the human rights fight right now, because I think it's the, you know, right now I will say it feels like one of the last waves to come in. Now I think as the future unfolds, there will probably be other groups that we identify that need to be brought into that fold. But right now I think it's a really important group of individuals who need our allyship and need us to be a part of the fight of getting them equality. And the Constitution, I'm, you know, a geeky lawyer who loves the Constitution, and it, you know, it guarantees every single one of us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Every single one of us. And that includes trans plus people and everybody else.
I love that perspective. Thank you very much. And what have you worked on since being in the legislature with the LGBTQ caucus to improve the lives of transgender Californians?
Yeah, so most of the work I've done has been in my capacity as a member of the Public Safety Committee. I think there's a lot of work to be done in the criminal justice realm for trans plus individuals and LGBTQ plus individuals. Senator Weiner is a huge advocate for that, so I've been proud to help move his legislation forward as it relates to those who are incarcerated, making sure that trans individuals who are in our prisons are allowed to be housed in the housing that feels right to them, right? And that was a really important step forward, I believe, for trans plus people in our criminal justice system. So I was happy to support that piece of legislation. I think there was a piece of legislation this year about, criminalizing certain sex acts and making sure that it was equal for LGBTQ plus individuals. And that was a really hard fight because it was misconstrued by a lot of people. But at the end of the day, again, back to your question about human rights, equality is equality, and it needs to be in every space. And sentencing is one of those spaces. If straight people aren't going to be automatically on the registry, then LGBTQ plus people shouldn't automatically be on the registry, right? And that's equality. And we need to look at every piece of legislation that we have passed and every piece of our law and make sure that it is equal. And if it's not, we need to fix it.
And I think I read it, am I correct, that California was the first in the nation to pass the trans plus people being able to be in the prison of their identity?
I believe we did pass it. I didn't know we were the first in the nation, though. So that is possible. Yeah, that was Scott Wiener's SB 132. And it's a really, at the Public Safety Committee, we had testimony by a trans plus individual who had been housed in the prison that didn't feel right to them, that didn't jive with their own identity, and what that experience was like, both from just a living without dignity perspective, right? But also safety. We should always be top of mind to be the safety of those in our custody. And it's not safe for people to be housed in prisons that don't match their identity.
So what are some of the ways that California protects the rights of transgender and gender nonconforming folks more robustly than other parts of the country?
So California, we are proud of leading in many spaces. And I believe that our protections of trans plus individuals and the LGBTQ plus community and nonconforming individuals, we're doing a lot. I want to start by saying we could always be doing more, and we need to be looking at the ways in which we can do more and pushing forward and leading and showing the nation what it means to truly provide equality for trans plus individuals. But if you look at our law, in housing, we prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Employment, we don't allow discrimination based on gender identity. We've really pushed forward in marriage equality, although, as I said, as someone who worked on the Prop 8 cases, we obviously have a history there, right, of not always protecting equality in California. And we need to be aware of that is part of our history, and we have to acknowledge it and move forward knowing we are going to be better in providing equality. We have really strong hate crime laws, which also address the trans plus community, which is super, super important. Public accommodations, we prohibit discrimination there based on gender identity. We have strong anti-bullying laws, which is also really critical. When you look at the suicide rates of our young people who are trans plus and gender nonconforming, we have to be doing everything we can to protect our youth and ensure that they are safe from bullying and that they are but they know that things will get better, and that they deserve to thrive and to be a part of our community, and that suicide is not the answer. And I think that's always really critical. On healthcare, we've passed some good laws, a ban on insurance exclusion, but that's an area where I think we have a lot more work to be done, right? 1 in 6 hospital beds in the state of California are Catholic hospitals, where trans plus individuals are not getting the care they deserve, right? And we know that. And, we've had, in the past year, there have been discussions about the UC joining up with our Catholic hospitals, our own University of California system, providing care through hospitals that will not provide care for those trans plus individuals who end up in the system. And so we have to be paying attention to that and doing more in that space. So we've done a lot, but we have a lot more work to do.
So how can individuals and groups who really care about this issue, they're not really ready to run for the office themselves, they have a job they already love, but how can they maybe on the side get involved in legislative issues to progress transgender rights?
Well, I'm not going to let you off that easily. We don't have any trans individuals in the California state legislature. So as much as we believe we're ahead, we're behind a lot of states where they do have individuals who are trans representing the trans community in their legislature. So I'm going to say, think about running for office. But there is always work to be done. We talked about Senator Wiener's bill this year that we had a really hard time passing. Advocacy is really, really critical, even if you're not an elected official, but our community's voice matters. And so getting involved, following organizations on social media or signing up for their email list so you know ways that you can be involved is really critical, because those will provide updates for what's going on in the community that you can get involved in to communicate with your legislator, things that matter to you. And we need people all across the state of California doing that, because you never know which legislator is going to need a push from their constituents. So, follow organizations like Equality California, Trans Latina Coalition. As a former San Francisco lawyer, I love the National Center for Lesbian Rights, HRC, and of course, the California LGBTQ caucus is always letting the community know about what's moving in the California state legislature. So following them on social media will help you know what's going on. But get engaged. These issues are really important. And in order to move them forward, we need both members of the community engaging and also allies like me, lifting up the voices of our community so that people know this is an area we need to be working on and we need to be moving forward with.
And what are other ways people can get involved? Maybe a policy approach isn't for them. Maybe they just want to have some, multiple ways to get involved.
Yeah, I think watching, it's funny, I don't feel that old, but having watched the entire gay marriage movement move through history, basically, right? Having been born in the late 70s, when it wasn't even on the table, to watching marriage equality sweep the country, the thing I learned most from that was that what changed the dynamic was people telling their own stories, people getting to know their neighbors, and getting to know that these were just neighbors who loved one another, who wanted marriage in the same way as people who were not of the same gender, right? And so that changed the dynamic when it was someone you knew, someone you cared about, someone you respected, and that was really brave. I want to put it out there. That was a really brave thing for the LGBTQ plus community to do, but it changed the conversation across this entire country faster than I think any of us believed was possible. And so what I learned from that is that it's our job to listen to those stories, and then to also make sure people know those stories, that people understand who the trans plus community is, that there are neighbors, there are friends, there are coworkers, they're just our community. And so their rights matter as much as everybody else. And so, be an ally, be a listener, be an advocate. And that can be in your own daily conversations. It doesn't have to be in some grand platform, right? And that's really critical. And, then when people need assistance finding community organizations or support, be there. Again, the suicide rates for trans plus and gender nonconforming folks is so astonishing that we need to be there to provide support when somebody is down, because that's the last thing we want. We want to help people understand that this is a community that accepts everybody, including our trans plus individuals, and that we're here to support them and get them to a place where equality is their reality.
This can be the Transgender Awareness Week we use to decide we're going to start to listen to the stories of this community. Maybe that means getting involved in legislative advocacy, or maybe it just means respectfully asking someone what their pronouns are.
Whatever we do, we cannot do nothing while this segment of the LGBTQ+ community, long known to have fought for the rights of all LGBTQ+ individuals, continues to be targeted and discriminated against. Once and for all, we have to stand and say that trans rights are human rights. I'm Jen Hardy.
I'm Talitha DeMessa.
And we're with Look West.
The Look West podcast is produced by the California Assembly Democrats. When you think of California and politics, remember to look west.